Hello and welcome to Liberated Tester podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. I am Gunesh Patil. On this show, we uncover secrets to the right mindset and skills to help you succeed in your software testing profession. Hello. Today we have Ian Flanagan, who has over 26 years of experience in software industry and has spent over 15 years in development and QA. He has helped prospects and customers build solutions to work with Sauce Labs, Perfecto Mobile, and now Testim. He also has an extensive background in Selenium, Appium, native frameworks, and DevOps. Ian is currently the Director of Solution Engineering at Tricentis, focusing on Testim, an AI-powered UI test automation platform for web applications, and now they're soon launching for mobile. Without further delay, let's roll it in. Hi, Ian. Hi, thank you for accepting the invite and thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. So I understand that you have been in industry for quite some time and you have been working with these SaaS products for quite some time in your experience. So why don't you maybe share more about yourself for our listeners?
Sure. Well, pleasure to be here with you. So my background was in computer science and mathematics and got into this industry in the mid-1990s and moved to Austin in 2000 and worked for a series of different startups and was in R&D for about 15 years and did really everything, and got into pre-sales in 2015 and really started working really with other companies in the testing space. Started with Perfecto and then went to Sauce Labs and company called Rollbar and Testim. And of course, Testim was acquired by Tricentis about a year ago. So been in the pre-sales space for a while, and I lead pre-sales for Testim and now Tricentis. So happy to be here.
Cool. That's good to know. So you have been in this part of industry for quite some time. So how have you seen the evolution of the low code, no code side of the tools? How do you think it is headed in the right direction for now, or is it still something that's missing that Testim is trying to add with this product?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So one of the reasons how I got into this was I started working with Selenium in 2009, about a year after it came out. And really, like most people, struggled with maintaining tests, struggled with creating more tests, creating higher levels of automation, also worked with Appium. And, a lot of the other players in this space have really made a career out of creating a company around infrastructure as a service.
Yeah.
So they have a Selenium grid on demand in the cloud. They have devices on demand in the cloud, and you can run tests in parallel across these devices, and they have APIs, and you can get the feedback and the results. The challenging part with that, from my experience, having worked at some of these other companies, is that a lot of customers would come to us and say, you know what, I really need help creating tests. And for some of those other companies, the response to that is, well, we've got professional services, we can have someone come in and create a bunch of tests, but that's going to cost money. And or there was someone that say, hey, I've created a lot of tests, but I'm spending a lot of time fixing broken tests in Selenium. We tried CSS selector, now we're using XPath, we used ID, we used JavaScript selector, but things change and we just spend a ton of time fixing tests.
Yeah.
So really, that's kind of the evolution of these low-code tools. Testim was really one of the first in the space to use artificial intelligence to help with the authoring and maintenance of UI and end-to-end tests. And it was really born out of that challenge around, like what I was just saying, how do I create tests that are fast, that are stable? How do I reduce the need to maintain broken tests? How can I get people that are in a mixed team? Maybe I have a developer or an automation engineer, a business analyst, a manual tester. How can all of these people use and leverage a tool like that? And I think that's really kind of the impetus behind product like Testim, for example. So to answer your question, that was a long-winded way of saying, I think there's a significant need for these types of tools. And I think we'll see a dramatic increase in these types of tools going forward for sure.
Cool. It sounds really advanced way of doing things, but for someone like me, I mean, I'm I'm quite new to this particular aspect of tooling. I've tried a bunch of tools, but the codeless authoring that you said, right? Can you explain a bit more on that? What exactly it does, how it is?
Yeah, good question. So it's really a bit of a misnomer because with Testim, if you want to code, you can. So we
Mm-hmm.
have a couple of built-in functions. One's a custom action, runs in the browser. You could go in and write custom JavaScript. If you wanted to write code to connect to a database and extract test data to use throughout the context of the test, or
Yeah.
make an API call and get the data back to use throughout the context of the test, you
Mm-hmm.
can do that in Testim as well. That's what we call a CLI action, which runs in Node.js outside of the browser.
Okay.
But in terms of creating tests with the record feature, because we have access to you install a Chrome extension, gives us access to the DOM, at least on the
Mm-hmm.
website, and it allows you to record everything you're doing within the context of the web app. And then based on that, we build a confidence score using artificial intelligence and generate a probability of how likely we are to find a particular object.
Okay.
But if you're not well versed in coding or doing things like that, you
Mm-hmm.
can use the product and create a wide array of different types of tests without having to code. On the flip side, as I said earlier at the beginning, if you have background in coding and you want to do more complex things, you can
Yeah.
also use Testim to do it. So it's advertised as a low code solution, but we have a lot of people, we do sell to a lot of developers that are more technical and want to go in and do coding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like an added advantage for someone who really doesn't want to lose that touch with the coding and they still want to use some of the features that are there in the Testim, right?
Right.
Yeah. If we talk about the tool and the features that you mentioned, right? So some of the features that I've observed while I was doing some background research and some of the materials, I think some of the other features are also the device management and the cross-platform device testing. Like, let's say if I have a Windows machine, I could still test an iOS device, right? So
Right.
how is that achieved in the product? I mean, what makes this work?
Yeah, good question. We just released a mobile testing aspect to the platform. Prior
Mm-hmm.
to that, we did support the ability to create web tests that could run on both emulators and simulators
Yeah.
in Testim. Okay, if you're creating a web test.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we also have a mobile aspect of the platform that was released in January 23rd of this year. And
Okay. Mm-hmm.
that allows you to test mobile applications. So in order to do that, you can either physically tether a local device to your workstation,
Okay.
or if you're using tools like Xcode or Android Studio,
Mm-hmm.
you can spin up emulators and simulators and connect those virtual devices and author and playback tests locally as well within
Okay.
Tesla.
Mm-hmm. And these are only limited to mobile browsers, or can I also test apps with it?
So we've supported web testings from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So on Testim, we do have cross-browser testing like Sauce or Browser Stack or Perfecto. We also have a Selenium grid on demand. In addition, where those guys don't, we also help with the authoring, the maintenance of tests. So
Okay.
today, before we release the mobile solution, you could take and do web testing on emulators and simulators and on desktop browser. We also released the mobile solution. We do support native applications. The
Okay.
ability to test web applications on a real physical device will be coming in Q2 of this year, along with support for hybrid applications as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that sounds really interesting. In terms of the mobile applications, now you also mentioned that in Q2 you're adding the support for the hybrid ones. So
Yeah.
what all other technologies that particular section covers in terms of hybrid?
Yeah. So for those folks that don't understand a hybrid app, if you're working with a
Mm-hmm.
native app, if you click on a particular link and it brings up a web view, that typically is a hybrid app in a nutshell.
Okay.
And usually a lot of the technologies that hybrid apps are created in or technologies like React.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the main one that we see. So any app that falls into that category is usually a hybrid app, and we're going to support those in Q2 of this year. Today for the Testim mobile, we do support native apps. So typically these are apps that are created in Swift, Objective-C for
Okay.
iOS and
Okay.
Xcode,
Hmm.
or Android Studio with Kotlin or Java. Right. So we're
Oh,
supporting
okay.
those types of applications today.
Hmm. And do they need to be on the device that I'm testing, or they can be stored somewhere else also?
So the applications themselves can be uploaded to our platform. So you can upload an IPA or an APK file
Okay.
to a particular, you would create a project for iOS, you'd create a project for Android. If I was working with Android, I can upload an APK file to the Testim platform. And
Okay.
then when I'm going through and authoring a test, I can pick what application I want to install on the device. And that'll allow me to author a test, and I can play that test back locally.
Okay.
Did that answer your
And
question?
yeah, there's one more aspect that I wanted to understand from these APKs that I'm uploading. Sometimes when so these emulators or simulators will have that developer mode already on, because if it is not there, then I think you need some signed copy of that APK or something. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, so if you're working with iOS and you have a
Mm-hmm.
physical device tethered, you need to create a provisioning profile. So
Okay.
you would need an Apple developer account, and we have a whole process. It takes about 6 or 7 minutes to go through and create a provisioning profile that will allow you to install apps on a device.
Okay.
On the
And
Android, on the Android side, you don't have to worry about that.
okay. Okay. And I'm assuming if we are using any of these cloud device management, including yours, I won't be needing these steps to be, they will be taken care by the grid itself, right?
Yeah, so once you create the test, those tests are stored in the testing infrastructure, and then you will be able to run those tests on devices in the cloud.
Okay.
Today, we're partnering with Headspin. So if you have an account in Headspin, you'll be able to, we have a command line interface that allows you to run tests in parallel across desktop browser. We are partnering with Headspin, so you will be able to take that same test and test them and run it across multiple physical devices in the cloud, in their cloud.
Oh, okay. Sounds really good in terms of distributed execution. In terms of the overall capacity on the platform, let's say, what is the concurrency that I can achieve using any of the distributed device management platforms, including Testim?
Yeah, good question. So just to digress, the way our licensing model works, it really is, it's a different type of model. It's more of a consumption sort of base model. So
Okay.
it's unlimited users. We don't care how many users you have. It's really the number of executions per month. So we define that as if you're in the context of the application and you're clicking play and it opens the device and plays the test back on the device, that would count as a local execution. And then we basically will work with people to determine how many licenses they need. We have a sizing exercise that we go through with customers, and we figure out how many executions per month they're going to need.
Okay.
And then we will license them accordingly for that. So that's how the product is licensed.
Okay.
If you're going to be running these tests in parallel on a grid provider, those tests are also going to count against your license. Obviously, you would need to work with whatever device grid provider you're going to work with and determine how many licenses you're going to need, which will determine the capacity to run on those cloud device grid providers.
Okay. So if I take Testim as a platform for everything that I'm doing, even the minutes that I'm consuming or the parallel threads that I'm consuming are coming out of my license, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit different because if you look at other products like BrowserStack or Sauce or Perfecto,
yeah,
you buy a device that's in the cloud that's dedicated to you and your team.
Yes.
And it's kind of an all-you-can-eat kind of an approach to how the product works.
Yeah.
And they tend to charge a lot more for the device for that exact reason. Testim has a bit of a different approach to how we license the product. So it is really more of around the number of executions per month. But again, where these other guys don't do this, we're helping you with the authoring, we're helping you with the maintenance, and we have the infrastructure as well. So we're actually doing all three, where a lot of those other players just provide the infrastructure as a service. They're not helping you create tests. They're not helping you maintain tests when they break.
Yes, absolutely. I have also experienced these things that you just said. It's only infra that is there. But in terms of troubleshooting, let's say I am a licensed user at Testim, and in let's say for that particular troubleshooting for some of my tests, if I have to reach out to your team or any other support staff, how easy it is in Testim
Yeah,
to.
good question. So at a high level, if a test fails, we have some root cause analysis. So
Mhm.
we'll bubble to the top the exact step in the test that failed. It'll be red. It will show you, we have screenshots. So the first time the test runs, we create what we call a baseline.
Okay.
Every subsequent time the test runs, we create a screenshot. It's compared to that baseline, and you can visually go in and see what the differences are. If
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
text on the screen we were trying to validate, it'll say that we were looking for this text. Here's what appeared on the screen. We
Yeah.
also expose some networking logs, some console logs. So from a root cause analysis standpoint, that's what we're helping you with, kind of bubble to the surface to quickly identify what the issue is. From a
Hmm.
support standpoint, we have 24/7 in-chat support. So I've worked at other companies where you'd have to email support and
Yeah.
hope and pray they get back to you in a timely fashion. We have 24/7 support.
Yeah.
And usually when people go on to the in-product chat, within a minute, one of our support engineers is interfacing with that particular customer.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's an option. You can email support as well. We have a customer success team that's there to help different customers. Depending on the price point they come in, there's different types of engagement
Okay.
depending on the price point as well. So there's
Hmm.
several things. In addition to that, we also have a YouTube channel, and I've created a lot of the videos myself. We have also a couple of specialist courses that people can go through to get some overview of how the platform works, both on the mobile side and test them for the web as well.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really cool. In terms of the courses that you mentioned, is it available on any other site of Testim or?
There's two courses. One is a Testim specialist course that we
Hmm.
created 6 months ago, and it's really sort of a high level of getting started with Testim. This is
Okay.
really about authoring web applications.
Yeah.
We just also published a Tricentis getting started with Testim mobile class that helps people getting started with working with mobile applications, working with the
Hmm.
Tricentis mobile agent, working with IPA, APK files, uploading them to the platform, how to author a test, how to play the test back, how to run the tests on different cloud providers, et cetera. So we have several different classes out there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Got you. Let's go into the actual interface. So when I was going through my trial and was playing with the tool, in terms of authoring, I like the way the tiles are placed for each of the step which is there, so you can really see what's happening there, and the overall flow is really great. I mean, that visual representation of your test steps is something which really gets me. I mean, I'm very visual person, so
Yeah,
that really helped me get the understanding. Because if you look at a Selenium test or even any other low code no code tool, in that you don't see it visually. You just see the steps and then you have to read through the steps to understand what's happening. But that's a really cool way of representing a test. I really like that way of doing it. Let's talk scalability here in terms of your test. Is there anything maximum number of steps you recommend based on, because the pricing model is based on the execution minutes, right? So you are not charging on the steps which are executed. But is there
right.
any recommendation in terms of what is the minimum or optimum number of steps that you can have, which will help your test?
Yeah, good question. So I worked with customers that were like, oh, my test is I'm having some issues, and they have 500 steps or whatever. So that's a great question. In general, we recommend that tests are under 75 steps. And
Okay.
forget test
Okay.
them aside, just best
Hmm.
practice. Tests should be atomic, they should be autonomous, and they should run in under 2 minutes in general.
Yeah.
And so with test them, ideally, we want tests to be under about 75 steps
Okay.
for that
Uh,
reason.
all right.
Yeah.
And I also saw some version controlling, which is also that you have introduced. So can you just tell us a little more about how that version control works in context of a
Yeah.
test?
So what we noticed was that, development teams would be creating the application and testing teams would be testing the application. And we wanted to create more of a synergy between those two groups.
Uh-huh.
And so we do have integrations with both GitHub and Bitbucket. And
Okay.
so in those situations, for the application under test that the team is creating tests for, you can create an integration. Let's say the source control is in GitHub. So the development team can basically integrate that repository with Testim. So when a new branch of the application is created for a new feature or a hotfix or something like that, if that is enabled in Testim, Testim will create a branch for those tests in Testim, and it allows testers to create tests against different branches of the applications. And then we support full branching and merging. We support pull requests, so you have control and insight as to what's happening in the tool, and you could say, okay, we're going to do a pull request. These 4 tests were created. These are going to get merged back into the master. You can set approvers and things like that. So it gives you more visibility into, number one, who's making changes in the tool. You have control. You can set approvers and determine who can approve different changes being made. And you can stay in sync with the dev team is doing when they create different branches.
Wow, that sounds really collaborative way of approaching these tests, right? Let's go slightly deeper into collaboration. So let's say I have my dev team also authoring these things, and they have been doing it, and we got it merged, and everything is okay. But let's say when I executed it, the report saw a certain dip in a certain region. Can you maybe tell us more about how the reporting of Testim helps in that case? And can I see different dashboard for different branches, or is it like just one dashboard and whatever is there is there?
Yeah, good question. So that's a lot. Let me try to unpack this. So you can see different dashboards for different branches. The default is the master, but we can report on different results for different branches. We also have some other mechanisms to help organizing tests. You can create labels. Labels can be assigned to tests. You can filter tests by owner. We have kind of an advanced sort of test status. We all know what pass or fail are, but we have, quarantine or evaluating or draft. So tests that are in quarantine, if they were part of your CI build, like Azure DevOps, and the test, if it was in quarantine, it's going to get skipped. It's not even going to get executed. Tests that are in evaluating, for example, let's say you're using Jenkins and you have Testim tests in your Jenkins pipeline, and the status and Testim for these tests is evaluating. Maybe they're not consistently running and not stable, but you want to add them to your CI process. If they fail, they're not going to fail the build. So this test overview or test status in Testim allows you to control how tests are actually executed from your CI tool, all within managing those within the context of Testim. So it's another way to kind of organize tests from test status. So you have owner, test status, branching, merging. So there's multiple ways that you can kind of get visibility into different tests and results.
Yeah, and I think this particular variation or this particular number of combinations that you have provided, I think that, like they say, right, there's no one size fits all. But once you have those many permutations and combinations that you can create of just organizing a test, then it does fit with every team's approach. I think then the team will not have to diverge from their usual way of maintaining tests, because sometimes I have observed this, that once you onboard a tool, you have to stick to the tools, whatever the way they arrange, you have to arrange your test like that. But I think that this is kind of a differentiator that I see here in terms of organizing your test and then keeping the way your team is comfortable with. I think you're facilitating that very well during this particular collaboration approach, which is really good.
I think really when I'm talking to customers, I usually pull up IntelliJ, and if you're looking at IntelliJ or Eclipse or Visual Studio or VSS Code, and you're trying to figure out, most customers we work with, they usually adhere to some sort of an agile process. They do 2-week sprints or 3-week sprints or week sprints. And if you're looking at a tool like IntelliJ, it's a great tool, but it doesn't give you a lot of visibility into how do I prioritize what I need to be focusing on? What are the most important tests that I need to fix today? How do I kind of organize the different tests I've created? It's not really very good at those types of things. And really, that's where we tried to go with some of those some of those dashboards and Testim, was to give you some more insights and visibility into those types of things.
Yeah, while I was also trying out the tool, I did find that very interesting, because then I don't have to think about, oh, now I have a tool, now I have to rearrange the way I arrange the test. I could just get my test and then use the same structure across here, which is really simplifies my job and takes that overhead out. Yeah, cool. While we are on the arranging and the structuring of the test, I also want to touch on the aspect of shared steps that are there. So how do the shared steps work? Is that like a collection of steps, or can I create one test and then reuse that test, or can I do both?
Yeah, good question. So shared steps or reusable components are really analogous to a method in programming. So if I have a common flow that I'm going to do over and over again, the most obvious one are log in and log out, because usually you have to be logged into the product to really begin any sort of testing or testing of any sort of flows. And so usually with any customer we work with, that's one of the first things we focus on. What are the low-hanging fruit, the flows that every test is going to have, log in, log out. And once you create these flows and test them, we call them groups. They can be shared amongst any other test you currently have or any test you're going to create in the future. That in combination with autocomplete. So if you create a login flow and you go back into the product and try to go through that login flow, the artificial intelligence will pop up and say, hey, it looks like you've already created this login flow. Do you want to add this group to your test? And you can say yes. And it will log you into the product or do whatever that flow does. So those will dramatically increase the authoring of tests. And once you start creating those, you only have to create it once. Again, just like a method, if you needed to go back and edit any of those steps, you do it in one place. It would affect any other test where that shared step is used. So shared steps are definitely a best practice. They can be parameterized. You can add conditions on them. They can be looped over. So there's a lot of more complicated things you can do with shared steps within Testim, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really time-saving thing that you just mentioned. But let's say I have created these shared steps and other things. In terms of web testing, they might work well, but now that you also have the mobile thing on this, right? So if I have some shared steps which I've already created, let's say using an iOS device, would they work the same way in an Android device?
It's a good question. So the way we're structured for the mobile projects today is that you would create an iOS project for iOS and you would create an Android project for Android.
Okay.
So usually from my experience as well, usually the flows for iOS are different than Android. And so when I was doing Appium, we'd have to create this huge method and say, if it's iOS, go into this section of the code. If it's Android, go into this. And it was a mess. So in general, since the flows are different, we have two different projects. Eventually, they'll be merged into one. But for this first implementation, if you created shared steps for iOS, they would be for iOS. If you created shared steps, they would be for Android. But there is a way potentially to share those from one project to another. We do support cloning. You could clone one project to another. So there's some ways to do that. But in general, you would have a separate project, one for iOS, one for Android.
Okay. Understood. Let's say there are a few applications. For example, I have a banking application, for example, and it needs to know that you're banking from a certain location just to avoid some fraudulent transactions, or just to check whether you are in the right location or not. So for that, you might need to access the device configuration or the hardware specifications, basically, to check all these things prior to that. And also banking app itself will have that, but you also want to make sure that you are testing that in the test, whether that application is actually checking it or not. So are there any steps that can help in these kind of scenarios?
So you mean you're referring to more of like a geolocation, geofencing?
Yeah, more like a geofencing, geolocation kind of a thing.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to do that. For this first implementation, we're not supporting the ability to inject GPS or change the location of the device. However, having said that, since we are partnering with Headspin, they do have data centers all over the world
Yeah.
and devices all over the world. So you can author the test. And then when you want to play those tests back, if you're using them, which is our preferred device provider, you could specify devices in different locations and actually test those types of scenarios. Being able to change the GPS location on the device is something that's coming in the roadmap. And I believe it's scheduled for Q2 of this year.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Sounds good. There are a couple of ways that you can, you already mentioned that I have to upload an APK for the app, but is there also a versioning that can be applied to those APKs and the installer files that are there in the Testim platform?
Yeah, we are supporting versioning. And once you upload an IPA or APK, if you were to author a test and play it back, if you have multiple different applications, you could change the application in the library and say, okay, I created this test on V1, but now I want to test it against version 2 of the app. So we do support that today.
Okay. And is it like a simple config parameter, or do I have to do it in
It's a simple config parameter. It's at the test level because we don't know what application you want to change for what test. But you can do it. You can do it at the test level for sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So if I maintain like a consistent versioning across whatever apps I'm using, and then I just change one variable at a global level, then I should be able to run them against different versions, right?
Right. Correct.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now that, let's say I'm still authoring these things, can I also access the files or the databases which are there on the mobile device? Because in emulators and other things, I've observed that it's not that easy sometimes to access those things.
Accessing files on the emulator?
Yeah, on the emulator. On the physical device, I can understand, but I myself have, I've had few difficulties while accessing things or storing things on an emulator or simulator. So is there anything special that Testim supports to facilitate that or simplify that?
For this first implementation, not really. And it's kind of a V1. So we are going to allow you to obviously install an app on the device because you'll need to do that to author a test.
Yeah.
The other thing that we can do is we can also work with any app that's already previously been installed on the device. So you can create a test for that. But in terms of uploading other images or files to the device for this first version, we're not supporting that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about the roadmap going slightly more later in the discussion. Sure. Yeah. So apart from the best practices that you already mentioned for like authoring a test, the 75 steps that are less than 2 minutes thing, is there any other best practices that you would advise so that my testing is very smooth? Is there any other best practices? Yeah.
There's a bunch, so we could spend a lot of time on this, but we do support test data, so you can upload either an Excel file or a CSV, which we're going to convert to a JSON format, which you can use to data drive your tests. So we do highly recommend doing that. That way, if something changes, you can manage it within the context of the Excel file that you've uploaded. So data driving the tests is definitely something that we recommend. And then usually at a high level, when we work with customers, there's usually somebody that we identify as kind of one that's going to be overarching, kind of architecting the tests and determining groups and creating reusable components. We'll want to make sure, usually when we map out an application, we'll think of, okay, we need to create a group for login, for log out, putting something in the shopping cart, checking out, whatever the main flows of the application are. So we want to be able to surface those and make sure that we create reusable components or groups that map those particular flows first, because once we start doing that, we do a few of these. I mean, just think of login, for example, right? We talked about login groups. If I create a login group with Testim, now I've automatically automated like 6 other test cases: invalid username, login, invalid password, successful login, log out, reset password. So there's 4 or 5 different flows from creating that one reusable component that now we can create because of that. So the test data, mapping out the groups that we want to create. We can add conditions to groups, so we can say, I only want to log into the product if I see the login text on the screen. If I don't see that, I don't want to do that.
Okay.
Those are some things. We support looping. So we've had customers that have said, I want to take the same test, and instead of closing it, I just want to loop through and log into the product with 30 users and make sure that they all can log in, so we can support that. So looping in a lot of cases will come into play.
Yeah.
Conditions, test data. Those are the top ones, really. Kind of a little bit more below the covers. We can also set different timeouts. They can be at the step level. They could be at the test level. So the default timeout is like 0.03 of a second, but sometimes if people are dealing with synchronization issues, they want to set a 1 second delay between steps.
Yeah.
We can do that. So those would kind of be a little bit deeper, but at a high level, test data, groups, conditions, looping, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of having these documented, I have also gone through the documentation for Testim, but in terms of the documentation that you provide, which is very exhaustive, I'm pretty impressed with the way it is all organized. I mean, you don't really have to reach support unless it's a very critical issue, is what I found from the documentation. It's a really good maintained documentation. Let's say I've authored my test. Let's say I also did it on a device with my local thing. But now, let's say, using my CICD or using the schedulers that are already there in the Testim platform, if I want to have them, I came across a very interesting thing. It says run in turbo mode is what I've seen. So can you tell us more about like what exactly is a turbo mode, what it does?
Yeah, sure, of course. So just to digress real quickly regarding, you mentioned CI tools. So
yeah,
we basically integrate with any CI tool, provided you can install, get to a shell and you can install npm and our node package. You can basically kick off test from anywhere. We also have a REST API, and so you can create code that can kick off test from anywhere from any other CI tool as well. If you're not using a CI tool, we have a built-in scheduler. It's sort of like analogous to a cron job, which would run tests periodically. Those tests can be executed on our Testim infrastructure for the desktop web. We also integrate with Sauce Labs and Browser Stack for the desktop web if you want to run tests on their infrastructure, or the ability to run desktop web tests on any Selenium compatible grid. The turbo mode is something we released maybe 6-9 months ago, and it allows the tests to run. They typically run about 30% faster. And so if tests pass, we're not going to expose as many of the artifacts. If tests fail, then we're going to show you the screenshots and the logs and some of those other things. But tests that pass, we're not going to expose as much of the artifacts. And so typically in turbo mode, the test executions run about 30% faster.
Just because all the logging overhead is not there in that particular.
Right. Yeah. Correct. Yep.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. We already touched upon the executions and the reports, but I want to understand one more factor in it. Let's say I have done this scheduling and I had the report. What are some of ways that I can communicate that report? Like how can I send it across to the team?
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. If you're using our scheduler, there's an email integration, so it can email you results, whether it failed on the first time or every time you have a failure, it can have it generate an email. It can also have it integrate with Slack, or it can send a webhook to some other type of system. If you're using a CI tool like Jenkins or Bamboo, you can integrate it to send failures to different people there. We have other customers that use other tools and they have other mechanisms. But if you're using the scheduler within Testim, we have it does integrate with email and it can send the results to whoever you want.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That sounds really good. In terms of integrations, because we are talking about integrations, can you tell us more about like what are the different integrations? Does it integrate with Jira or any other test management tool that I have if I have to manage a test management apart from this?
Yeah, good question. So we have out of the box integrations with GitHub, Bitbucket, Apply Tools, the founder of Testim, was the former R&D director at Apply Tools. So if anyone wants to get in and do deeper low-level pixel sort of validations of images, we do integrate with Apply Tools. We integrate with Slack.
Yeah.
On the bug tracking side, we integrate with Jira, Trello, Slack, GitHub Actions. On the test management side, we integrate with TestRail, Qtest, and we also have some integrations with Microsoft Azure, either creating a work item or updating a work item as well. But we could really integrate with any other test tool, provided we had access to the API. We could write custom hook actions. So we really can integrate with anyone. The ones I mentioned are the ones we have out of the box.
Okay. And let's say if I have to write a new one, like let's say what is the time or the support that I can expect?
Yeah, good question. So if you wanted to integrate with some other test tool that we didn't have an out of the box integration with, you would have to write the code yourself for that.
Okay.
We'd have to look at what the API was. If you were doing a proof of concept with somebody on my team, we could help you with that. But usually, and we've done that for other customers, so it's usually not that big of a deal.
Okay. That's relieving, because sometimes I have already paid a fortune for one tool and then I want to integrate it with this. Then if there is no way, then that money is already gone. So I don't want to end up in that place when I invest in something like Testim, which is really cool.
And that's a good question. I mean, that's why we do have a lot of out of the box integrations, but we have created integrations for other customers. Some other things that were coming is this is a little bit tangential with what we're talking about, but we also have another product that's called TTM for Jira. Sort of it competes more with sort of the X-rays of the world. Okay. And we are going to be integrating with that as well soon. So.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. And let's say if I have an existing test management and I have some of the steps written, let's say I have a BDD kind of steps which are written, and I want to integrate them and map them to a test here. Have you done anything like this previously?
So we worked with a customer that insisted on using Cucumber and kicking off tests from Cucumber from the IDE in Testim.
Okay.
We did create an integration that allowed them to do it.
Okay.
It's a little bit different because if you're working with Cucumber, you have a feature file, you have step definitions, and there's no way to directly integrate that with Testim. What we had to do is create the same test in Testim, but the customer really wanted to still stay within IntelliJ and kick off the tests in Testim. So we have an integration that allows them to do that. But in general, usually people that are using something like Cucumber ultimately kind of move away from that if they're going to use a tool like Testim.
Correct. But yeah, I mean, from the looks of it, it sounds very, very flexible in terms of the test stack or the tool stack that any of the teams are using. I think should be pretty much very much adaptable in terms of tech aspects of this. Then when we come to, you mentioned something about test data management. We do it in Excel and you convert it into JSON. But is there any way that I could generate my own data in these tests? Is it something that
good question. So we have because we allow you to create tests. One of the things was a CLI action runs in Node.js outside of the browser. That gives you the flexibility to install whatever npm packages you want.
Okay.
We have a lot of customers that use the Faker API to generate dynamic data on the fly that they're going to use within the context of the test and Testim. So that would be an example of creating and generating dynamic data that they're using throughout the context of the test. So you could do that. We have other customers that want to use more static data. It's completely flexible and up to the user. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds really cool. Coming back to the mobile, right? Doing it on, let's say I have a laptop, I got a trial for this, and then when I'm starting to execute this, what is your recommended local configuration for any sort of laptop?
Good question. So probably the first question we're going to want to understand, or see on Windows or Mac or Linux, the first thing that you would do is when you go into your trial, you'll notice that there's 3 projects. One is a web project, there's an iOS project, and there's an Android project. So let's say we're working with Android, we'd go to our Android project And in the top, there's this icon that green is good, and it's the Tricentis mobile agent. This is actually technology that we've imported from Test Project,
Okay.
which is going to be end of life next month
Yes, correct.
into Testim. Okay.
Yeah.
So that same technology that folks have used in Test Project is actually now imported into Testim.
Okay.
So you would install the Tricentis mobile agent, and really that we could go into a whole nother podcast about that. But essentially, it's got an Appium server running in it. It's doing a lot of things behind the scenes, and its really main function allows you to connect either physical or virtual devices that you're going to use with the Testim Chrome extension to record and playback tests on those devices locally. And so the first thing you would do is download the Tricentis mobile agent. It runs as a service. Takes about a minute to set up.
Yeah.
Once you have that running, you would need to install the Testim Chrome extension. And have access to the Chrome browser. And then you would either connect a physical device, or if you're using virtual devices, you probably need to be using something like Android Studio or Xcode. In general, what we've seen for this first release is that from a persona standpoint, it's probably going to be targeted more to a developer or an automation engineer, someone that's well-versed in some of these technologies. The next release of the product will integrate more directly with some cloud providers that would allow someone who's less technical to open a device in the cloud, author a test, and play it back on another test, for example. But for this first implementation, because it's a V1, we all got to start somewhere. So you really probably need to be a little bit more well-versed in some of these technologies to be able to work with emulators or simulators, or have a huge cart of devices, and of course most people are at home, so they're not going to have it. So that's kind of the background there. So really at this juncture, it's probably more geared for developers or automation engineers.
Wow. So there's a lot of tons of things that I can do with that single agent, right? Looks like it.
Yeah, the Tricentis mobile agent really is doing a ton of things behind the scenes, and without that, you'd have to download a version of Appium, and you'd have to get Appium Inspector and connect devices and certificates, and it would be a lot to get all that set up, and it's doing all that for you behind the scenes.
Correct. It's a really simplified version of, let's say you are going to invest maybe 2-3 days into setting this up, but with mobile agent, I think it should be done maybe within an hour, I think.
Yeah, even less than that. I mean, I worked with people that had this up and running in 5-6 minutes.
Oh, wow. Quick. That's very quick.
Very quick. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And in terms of, let's say the device farms that are already present, so I connect those mobile devices through this agent also, or do I do it from the cloud platform, which is there?
If you're going to author a test today for this first version, you have to have a device connected locally. Once you have that, whether that could be a physical device or a virtual device, if once you've authored that test is saved in the Testim cloud.
Okay.
If you wanted to run that test in parallel across multiple devices, you could do that. As of today, we're partnering with Headspin, and so you'd need to go and create an account in Headspin, but you could run that test across multiple devices in their device grid. From a roadmap standpoint, we are going to be integrating with SASA and Browser Stack in Q2. So you will be able to create a test and test them. And if you're using one of those other cloud providers for a mobile device grid, you'll be able to run on those. And that'll be Q2 of this year.
Okay. All right. It sounds very promising the way the roadmap is laid. Because we are on roadmap, let's discuss.
Yeah, let's talk about roadmap.
Yeah, let's talk about roadmap again. I mean, we talked about a lot of features which are already there in V1, and there's tons of things that you can do with a trial that I also tried, which is really awesome. I didn't expect it to do so many things in a trial. But yeah, let's talk about roadmap, what we can expect in V2. And if you can maybe summarize the V1 features again, that would be great.
Yeah, good question. So for V1 for mobile, we're supporting native applications. So these are apps that are created in Swift or Objective-C in iOS and the Android Studio, right, for Android. And today, essentially, basically, you can author native applications. So we do support swipe, we support tap, we support some of those basic features. From a locator standpoint, if you look at our web application and you click on one of the locators, there's, a ton of different locators and how they relate to whatever that object was on the page.
Yeah.
For the mobile, for this phase one, if you go in and look at our locators, we have about 5 different locators. So we'll look at ID, we'll look at text, we'll look at class. If it's Android, we'll look at resource ID and maybe 1 or 2 others. So even out of the box, we have sort of 5 different locators we're working with. If you're working with Selenium, typically, or Appium, typically you're using XPath or ID or resource ID, and XPath can be very brittle in this long path. And if something changes, the script fails and the test is going to fail. So right out of the box with Testim, even if we use about 5 different key locators, if the default one is ID, if it fails, it's going to fall back to text. Then it's going to try XPath, then it's going to try class. So we have about 4 or 5 different ways to try to figure out what that object is before failing the test. So that's kind of right out of the box. Ultimately, for this next implementation, we are going to be looking at dramatically expanding the locators and doing more pure artificial intelligence, which is what we're doing on the web front today. So that is coming. We talked about cloud providers. We are integrating with Headspin today, but if someone wanted to use Browser Stack or Sauce, we do support Browser Stack or Sauce integrations. If you're taking a web test and Testim and you wanted to run it on Browser Stack or Sauce desktop web, we support that today. For Q2 of this year, we will be integrating with Browser Stack and Sauce to run an Appium test that's created in Testim on their infrastructure. So that's that. We will be expanding some additional capabilities that you mentioned around geofencing. We'll be adding that. We'll be adding some more advanced features around double tap, those types of things.
Cool. The agenda and overall roadmap is very, very impressive. And it's going to enable a lot of teams do a lot of stuff in very low time.
I would say just in the last thing I would say the roadmap is, as we mentioned from our persona, is mainly geared for the technical folks. However, we will be getting to the point in the next implementation where you'll be able to open a device in the cloud, like I said, and author a test, and you won't need to rely on as many local devices tethered or connected. But then once that happens, I think that's going to be huge, right? Because then that's going to open it to even more people to use it.
Absolutely. It gives a lot of more user ease of use, basically, for the people who also want to test and they want to do their own test to be authored. I mean, looking at these features and all other things, I think there's a lot of innovation, out of box thinking, which is currently going on in the team. Can you tell us more about the overall culture, how a day in Testim looks like when you're developing like a product like this, which is a really cool one?
Well, I've worked at a lot of different companies over my career and a lot of different engineering teams. And I remember back in the days of Waterfall when we would spend 6-8 months and then deliver a product only to discover that it wasn't what the customer wanted, or there was too many bugs or issues. And fast forward, and I know most people are doing Agile. Some people do Fragile. Some people do stand-ups, and some people say they're doing Agile, but they really don't do it. And at Testim, we really do adhere to more of an Agile process. So we do follow 2-week sprints, with the caveat that when a feature is available, it gets deployed immediately to production. So there's many months where we could do multiple deployments a month, a lot of times multiple a week. And so for me, it's hard to keep up with the changes we're making, but they're significant and they're incremental, but they're happening constantly. So from that standpoint, it's great because when a feature is ready, it's available immediately. From that standpoint, like a lot of other companies, we want to get these features out into customers' hands so they can start playing around with it.
Nice.
I would say also we're still a small company, even though we were acquired by Tricentis. So Testim is a Hebrew word, which means a lot of tests. We were a small Israeli startup with about 65 or 70 people. So when you need to get something done, I could go to the CEO and say, hey, could you help me with this, or R&D. It's a little bit different now, but we're still a very small company. We're actually part of a new business unit called the DevOps business unit. And we're still a very small team of people. So it's a great environment.
I can really relate to that because we are also, I also work in a startup. We have about 80, 90 people here in India. So yeah, I mean that's the overall connect that you have. Overall collaboration is really enhanced in such small setups. You can get things done pretty quickly. But wow, I mean, it was really cool to know about testing culture as a whole. Can you tell me, like, out of all these features and all these things that you have already developed, what is your favorite part in the app?
I think from my background and working with things like Selenium, the biggest
Hmm.
challenge was I spent so much of my time fixing broken tests.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing that, we were only able to achieve a certain level of automation, like 35, 40%. If you talk to other companies,
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be sort of a standard. So the fact that I can create a test very quickly and have it be stable, and I could have 4 or 5 things under the covers change, and
Yeah.
that test still work, that's
Hmm.
huge. So the
Yeah.
authoring piece and then the stability, the test maintenance, those are still kind of the aha moments for me. When I show that to a customer, when I'm doing a demo with somebody, and they see that 4 or 5 attributes of an object change, they're still able to find it. Those
Yeah.
are still kind of those aha moments for me in the product, because I would be banging my head against the wall, spending so much time messing around with locators and stuff, only
Correct.
to not be able to accomplish much. So those are two still the big things in the product for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand the pain of doing those locators again and again and then banging your head, as you said. I've been in that position quite sometimes. So I can understand how big that is. And I think with introduction of AI in the V2 of your roadmap, I think this is going to get much more simpler.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this
Yeah.
version, at least we have the 5 locators. And again, as I said earlier, if you're using pure Appian, you pick, typically it's a 1 locator approach. We're out of the box, we're using 5 different locators to help people.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Cool. Yes, absolutely. All right, I think we covered lots and lots of items. Even though we were just talking about the product, I could see product in front of my eyes. I could see what's happening. Thank you for explaining it so well. I hope our listeners also get the feel of the product. I would recommend everyone to go and try the trial version at least and see whether it fits your organization, fits your culture, and it does so many things that you would be absolutely blown away by the product that Ian has and his team at Testim has built. So thank you, Ian. Thank you for your time again. It was really a pleasure to have you here. We wish
Yeah,
you all the
appreciate
luck
it.
to Testim. We hope to see more and more coming from the product in recent times.
Yeah, well, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy. Really appreciate being on the podcast today. And we'll
Yeah,
talk soon.
absolutely. Absolutely.
All
Thank you
right.
again. Have a nice
Take
day.
care.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye bye. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope you found it useful. If you did learn something new today, please follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and also share, rate, subscribe to the podcast so that you get the notifications for the new episodes as and when they're launched. Thank you for being here. It really means a lot to me. Until we meet again, it's a goodbye from my side. Take care and be in great health. Thank you.